Alright everyone, my name is Tanner Morse. I am starting a little tutorial series called Swift Essentials. These are just going to be some things that you need to know as an iOS developer, and we'll be targeting some of the areas that you'll be asked questions about during Swift interviews. And so this first video is going to be all about optionals. Okay, and according to the docs, it says the optional type is an enumeration with two cases. Optional none is equivalent to the nil literal or null in some languages, and the other case is optional sum, and it's wrapped, a wrapped value. Okay, so right here I have highlighted the optional type defined here. And so it actually comes from an enum, and this case sum value or case none. Alright, so how do you define an optional? First here, if you go to this line 20 here highlighted, I have an optional variable. It's optional type of int. You can tell it's an optional by the question mark that I put at the end here, and I have a couple other variables that are going to help us later on define. So what happens if I just tried to print an optional value? So I'm going to show you here. So let's go ahead and try to run that, and I'm going to get a warning here that says expression implicitly coerced from optional int to any. Okay, so this is telling me, hey, I need to unwrap this optional. I can't just print it like this. And so there are a few different ways to do that, and we'll go into that next. And if you go to line 26, I'm going to give the optional a value now, and then I'm going to print that value here. And if you look, I get the same error, and it says, and it's wrapped on the side over here. It says optional with a value of 2. Okay, so this is a wrapped optional with a value. And the first one, you see that it was a nil value right up top here, line 24. And below it is now I've given it a value of 2. And now it's wrapped. So the first way to unwrap an optional value is called unconditional unwrapping or force unwrapping. Okay, so this can be done, and I'll show you line 28 here by just throwing an exclamation point at the end. By doing that, I get rid of my yellow error, and now it prints 2. Now this is a very dangerous thing to do, because if you force unwrap an optional that is nil, your app is going to crash, and that won't be a good user experience. So when you go down here, let's go ahead and uncomment this, line 32. What you're going to do, what we're doing is we're going to sum up some values. And so I have my optional value here, and in my new value. My new value, if you look on line 21, is value of 2, and the optional value is currently 2, but I'm going to go ahead and comment this out and see what happens here if I don't force unwrap it. Go ahead and add, and here we go. I get a runtime error, and the value of int must be unwrapped to value type int. Alright, in order to add to this new value, which is also an int. So what I could do is I could force unwrap that like this and click play with the exclamation point, and there's the runtime error right there. Okay, so that is what happens if you don't have a value there. So something we can do to fix this is called coalescing nil values, or I like to say just providing a default value. So on line 36, it says sum, just like before, equals new value plus my optional value, but this is right here, the double question mark here is the providing a default value of 1. Alright, So by doing this, if optional value does not have a value, it'll say it's 1, and it'll be 2 plus 1, which equals 3. But if I give the optional, if I go ahead and uncomment this optional value on line 26, so now optional value equals 2, you go down and let's run it again. And now the sum now equals 4 because it's adding, optional value has a value of 2. And so 2 plus the new value, which is 2, equals the sum, which is 4. Okay, so moving on here, the next way that we can unwrap optionals is called optional binding. So it's binding a variable to an optional, oh, right here I have an error here, to an optional with a value. Okay, so what's going to happen here is you tag on this if let, and then you just create a variable name. It doesn't matter, you could say X if you want, kind of arbitrary there. So if let your value, your variable equals the optional value, so if it has a value basically, then you're going to run this second line of code. And then you can also do an else if you want, but it's not necessary for this to work, but providing else is good. You can print the value is not defined. That's just what I have it doing. You can run some other block of code as you want. So if I were to run this here, we're going to get 4 because I do currently have a value. But let's go back up to the top, get rid of this value, and let's run it again. We're going to get the print value is not defined because it now doesn't have a value, but your app does not crash at this point. So that's optional binding with the if let. What's tricky with these if lets is you can sometimes, when you're dealing with a lot of optional values, get pretty nested in your functions. And so this next one, this guard let, is a good way to get rid of that. So it says, I have some notes here. It says use a guard let to early return a function if an optional does not have a value. So let's say you have a ton of values, and if one of the conditions is not met, meaning one of the values is nil, then it'll return the function safely rather than breaking your code and quitting out of your app. So this unwrap optional value remain available in the rest of the code block. So that's what's really cool about guardlets. So if you look down to line 52, guardlet, and you can create a variable equals optional value. So now this unwrapped value is you can treat it like a variable inside your function. So in my whole function here, this unwrapped value can now be used. Its scope is within that function. So what happens if optional value does not have a value? Else, you can print, you can run an error, and then you return out of the function. So you get out of the function safely. Else, you can print the unwrapped value. So if we go ahead and we run, sum it up, it's going to say, if you look down here at the print, the bottom of the screen, guard value is not assigned. So it printed my statement. But if we provide optional value, we say optional value equals 2, then we're going to be able to print that value. If we provide a value, and there it is, 2. If you look here, the value is 2 on the right side of the screen. Alright, so let's go into some more practical examples real quick. So something you're going to see when you're using UIKit is a text field. Text field has lots of properties. The one I'm going to talk about is text. And if you look, when you're trying to access a text field, text, if you look at it, you're going to see that at the top here it says string question mark. That means it's a optional value here. So you're going to need to do some of our tricks that we learned to unwrap that optional. Okay, so on my function here, I have an if let answer equals text field.text, then print the answer. Okay, so that's one way to do it. Another way that you can do it again is say text field.text. You can force unwrap it .text there. That is again not recommended, but it is an option there. If you just leave it like that, text field.text. If you try to assign a variable var text equals text field.text, you're gonna again get that error here. And then you're gonna, let's go ahead and print that so we get the right error I'm looking for, text. There you go. Variable text is never mutated, let constant. And then especially, so right here, this is our error, the second one. Expression implicitly coerced from string to any. That's because it was taken from the optional type. So for that reason you need to do unwrap it like you would those tricks that I taught you. Okay, so if you go down here, let's go down to my image paths. This is something I took off of the docs from Apple. They have this dictionary called image paths. And image paths, when you try to access a value, the value is optional by default. So if you look here, if I try to print the stars thing, again, you're going to see, hey, expression implicitly coerced from optional string to any. So what you can do, again, not recommended, but you can force unwrap that, or you can go down and you can do an if let, and so if let star path equals image path star, so if it has a value, then you can print that value. Else, you can provide an error message there. So the last thing I want to show you on line 89, optional chaining. Alright, so optional chaining is a way to safely access the properties and methods of a wrapped instance. So our wrapped instance in this case is our image path accessing the star value. So optional chaining is literally adding that question mark there, and then you're able to call the function. So basically it's saying, hey, if star has a value, then let's run the rest of this. If you try to do that and it doesn't have a value, again, your app is going to crash. So I hope this tutorial helps you with optionals and making sure that you use the right tools and right ways to unwrap optionals when you need them, because they make your life easier, and sometimes they can be difficult at first, but they help us to be safe programmers and to have apps that have awesome user experiences because they don't crash. So thank you, like and comment if there's anything else you'd rather have seen with optionals or something that I missed. Just let me know in the comments below. Thanks.